Chapter 17 of Fact Stranger Than Fiction by John Patterson Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Austrian Tyrol, Paris, Ireland. The enormous expense of constructing railroads in southern and central Europe dawns upon one as he passes through those regions. The mountain ranges of the Alps and Apennines give a succession of heights and valleys to be negotiated, which at times almost startle one. The deep cuts through rocky regions, the spanning of yawning chasms and tunneling for miles and miles through the bowels of the earth pile up the expense to fabulous proportions. And did not governments at times come to the fore and assist in the consummation of these works, so necessary and convenient for all the people, it is questionable whether they would be accomplished. As being apropos to the subject under consideration, I recall some reflections made by a learned commentator on that passage of the Holy Scriptures wherein the Apostle Paul says to the Corinthians, "And though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains," the writer referred to maintains that faith has removed mountains in the only sense practicable, for that when faith, which begets and stimulates works, bores a passage-way through the mountain, and gives both ingress and egress, the mountain being no longer an obstacle, is practically removed. One noticeable peculiarity in the construction of locomotives used on the railroads lies in the fact that they have no cow-catchers attached to them, not for the reason, however, that Artemus Ward gave when he was traveling in the West long ago. "Conductor," Ward exclaimed, "I can't see of what use these cow-catchers are to any one. The trains move so slowly that there is no possibility of running over a cow, but if they were taken off the front of the engine and fastened to the rear of the train, they might prevent some ill-mannered cow from intruding on the passengers." Speaking of tunnels, the Mount Cenis tunnel between France and Italy has them all beaten, so to speak. It took the train 27 minutes to pass through it, going at what seemed a high rate of speed. So much has been written by tourists concerning the grandeur and beauties of Alpine scenery that it seems well nigh presumptuous for me to attempt to enlarge upon the same subject, but with becoming modesty I trust I will venture a few suggestions. The Apennine Mountains, covered in the month of May with the first offerings of spring, and bathed in an atmosphere laden with the odors of the sweet acacia blossoms, seem to be clothed in nature's most beautiful garment. But when in the midst of the snow-covered Alps, in that portion of Switzerland watered by the beautiful river Inn and the sources of the Rhine, I found that the half had not been told. Remembering the old saying, "Poeta nascitur, non fit," a poet is born, not made, I hesitate to attempt even rhyme, not to mention poetry. But who that possesses a soul can be whirled through that section of Switzerland between Innsbruck and Zurich in the springtime and restrain his muse, if he has one? Such an one must be dull indeed. Imagine yourself passing over a bridge which leaps across a chasm full 50 fathoms deep. In the foreground you see, in the form of an ellipse, a peaceful valley, watered by a pretty rippling stream, as pure as nectar, and as blue as the cerulean sky above it, ever and anon dashing over its rocky bed, which imparts to it that unspeakable beauty which no canvas has yet portrayed. While nestling within the shadow of some towering height, a little village bides its time until the return of those who till the fruitful fields or guard the fleecy flocks. Over all, some distance removed, like sentinels grim and grey, Olympus' heads crowned with perennial snow look down upon the clouds. Small wonder, then, that the writer, influenced by such surroundings, should mount and give loose rein to his impetuous Pegasus, and for once, at least, sing of those dreamy heights where nature's cradle ever rocks, and verdant vales where shepherds watch their feeding flocks, where waters blue with murmuring cadence never still prolong the sound of humming spindles in the mill, and flowers so sweet where busy bees with ceaseless moo inspire our faith and whisper in our soul that God is love. It is no wonder that these Swiss people are brave and honorable, for, reared amongst these crags and cliffs, and indurated to hardships and perils from infancy, it is natural for them to be as rugged, brave, and free as their mountain homes, and the pure atmosphere which they breathe. And in the march of time they have not only achieved their own religious and political liberties, but have rendered valuable assistance to others along the same lines. Here we learn of William Tell and Winkle Reed. The one defied the tyrant Gessler, while the other, at the supreme moment of his country's peril, converged the bristling spears of the enemy towards his own breast, and thus made way for liberty. The shores of the beautiful lake on which the city of Zurich is built present a scene which will some day in the future be rivaled by the south shore of our Lake Erie in places. Along the whole distance pretty towns and villas have sprung into existence, with flower gardens, green lawns, trellised vines, and the like, which give one the impression, as the train passes from one to another, that he is indeed in fairyland at last. There are numerous little docks for the convenience of canoes and yachtsmen, and as our train sped by we could see the numerous white-winged craft gliding over the bosom of the blue lake for the pleasure and health of their occupants. Snug bathhouses, too, were dotting the shores at convenient distances, which proved that the people in that vicinity at least were taking advantage of this precious and oft-neglected privilege. I would like to become ecstatic over the golden sun sinking behind the snow-capped mountains, etc., etc., but space forbids. Voile, Zurich, au revoir. Paris and Ireland. Since making my first visit to Paris in 1893, so many changes have taken place in the appearance of the big, gay city, and so numerous have been the persons from the United States who have visited this Mecca of the gay and fashionable, that what I shall say in the following may be read more as contrasting the metropolis of the present with that of the past, than as a correct description of the city as it now appears. Nevertheless, even the contrast may appeal to those who are prone to seeking something different. When I was leaving my home for an outing on the other side of the big pond, the story entitled Trilby by Du Maurier, predicated on conditions and transactions amongst the art students who have their habitat in the famous Latin quarter of Paris, was the rage. Every one who cared for the novel and spicy recitals pertaining to the grisette and even the demi-monde of the joyful city was devouring it with avidity. Hence many of my genial friends said to me, by way of jest, I suppose, "Be sure and write us a letter from Trilbyland." In giving my promise to do so, I little dreamed that I had undertaken a contract most difficult to perform. The difficulty arose not so much from a scarcity of materials out of which to write such a letter, as out of a superabundance of data from which I dared select. What most astonishes the average wayfarer in Paris with reference to social vices is not so much that they abound as the fact that they are patent to the casual observer, and flaunt themselves almost in the faces of passers-by on the public thoroughfares. I have no doubt that these conditions exist to the last degree of baseness in other great centres of population, but the police restrictions and repressions are such that the veil is drawn, the screen is placed, and doors are bolted, while in Paris at that time, bear in mind, a man could run and see the carryings on in some parts of the great city. However, I well knew that I could write no Trilby letter unless I visited the Quartier Latin, or Latin Quarter, as we call it. I, in my ignorance of the French pronunciation, went along inquiring for the Quartier Latin, just as though I were in the streets of London, but I received a blank stare and a negative nod of the head instead of the desired information. Finally, when my patience had been worn threadbare, I wrote the name on my memorandum book and presented it to a passer-by. He scanned it and exclaimed, "Ah, the Quartier Latin," and gave me all needed information for finding it. The Latin Quarter is not remote from the heart of the city. It is just across the river Seine, a mere stone's throw from the ancient cathedral Notre Dame, a few minutes' walk from the Palace of Justice, and in easy communication with the public buildings of the nation and city. In this quarter there are many stately buildings, having in the centre of them, or at one end, large tall entrances, arched at the top, and one invariably reads on a placard near by the inscription "Alower," apartments, or atelier, that is to say, rooms for rent in brief. It was in one of these buildings, Du Maurier informs us in his readable book, The Taffy, Little Bali, Trilby, Svengali, and others of the coterie held their social gatherings, and beyond doubt it was in some of the numerous brasseries in the immediate vicinity where they were accustomed to resort for the purpose of securing their refreshments, both liquid and solid. These brasseries are a species of café and saloon, blended, having large awnings in front of them, covering the sidewalk and sheltering guests from the sun and inclement weather. Upon the sidewalk in front of the brasserie were numerous small tables with chairs for the accommodation of the convivial guests, a motley group of art students from the four corners of the earth, and their cheerful, frivolous grisettes, young girls who, after the end of their day's work, spend the remainder of the evening in the manner which Du Maurier has so vividly depicted. The time to behold them in their glory was between the hours of 8 and 12 at night, when the students relax from their studies and the trilbies go out for a promenade and refreshments. I would not have the reader infer that these grisettes are all or even principally persons of unchaste character, for on the contrary many of them are girls, poor but honest, who sometimes adopt this method of securing recreation evenings after the day's work is ended. Not far from the quarter were the barracks where many soldiers were quartered, and one could frequently see, mingled with the gay and lively throng which is always to be found there, many Zuzus and Dodos in their bright, catchy uniforms, as in the days of little Billy and Trilby. There, too, were students conspicuous in long, flowing gowns, party-colored cloaks and mantles, and peculiar-shaped headgear, a smoking of their pipes. In one of these large buildings I found many conveniences pertaining to a club room, such as small tables, chairs, desks, and writing materials, also cards, chess, and checkerboards, and reading miscellany, while in the hall overhead the weird and seductive sounds of stringed instruments, the shuffling of feet, and the boisterous peals of laughter were easily suggestive of the same old can-can which we read about in the famous novel. Well might Dorian sing of the plaisir d'amour ne dure qu'un moment, chagrin d'amour dure toute la vie. That is to say, the pleasures of passion, love, endure only for the flitting moment, the vexations of love last all our life. Hard by, as I have said, the towers of old Notre Dame, black and gray with age, loom up towards heaven, hundreds of feet, chiseled deep in the broad buttresses of this cathedral. On the façade of the same one reads the words Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité, as if those heroes of the French Revolution who struggled for recognition in the long ago distrusted even heaven itself, and were determined to cut the sentiment so deep in the stone that it could not be effaced. Yet I have seen words carved equally deep in the stone obliterated, as witness the effacement of the name of the original architect of the old courthouse on our public square, which was done after he expressed joy at the assassination of the immortal Lincoln on the day on which he died. Therefore, I infer from the fact that the French inscription still remains intact, that the French people still endorse that grand sentiment, and proclaim to all the world, Liberté, Égalité, Fraternité. Also closely allied with the Latin Quarter is the Hôtel Dieu, which stands diagonally opposite to the old cathedral. This hospital is a large solid structure, the capacity of which must be often tried, if one would judge by the large crowds which stand in waiting at its doors every morning. Men, women, and children of all ages, a motley crowd of the blind, halt, and afflicted, such a crowd as crowded around our Saviour when he ministered to the needs of all who in faith came to him. Perhaps it was this Hôtel Dieu in the vicinity of the Quartier Latin which suggested to Dumouriez those lines which he put into the mouth of Trilby when, under the hypnotic influence of Svengali, she sang at the Parisian Cirque so mournfully, Ma chandelle est morte, je n'ai plus feu, ouvre-moi ta porte, pour l'amour de Dieu. My candle is out, I have no fire, light, open to me your door for the love of God. Almost directly in the rear of the old cathedral is the morgue on the bank of the Seine, which cuts so conspicuous a figure in the story of poor Trilby. Oh, what a sombre, suggestive place it is, or was! I listened to that arch-fiend Svengali's description of it. There is a little ugly gray building there, and inside are 8 slanting slabs of brass, all in a row, like beds in a school dormitory, and one fine day you shall lie asleep on one of those slabs, you, Trilby, who would not listen to Svengali, and therefore lost him, and over the middle of you will be a leather apron, and over your head a little brass tap. and all day long and all night the cold water shall trickle, 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 all the way down your beautiful white body to your beautiful white feet, till they turn green, and your poor, damp, muddy, draggled rags will hang above you from the ceiling for your friends to know you by. Drip, 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 but you will have no friends, and people of all sorts, strangers, will come and stare at you through the big plate-glass windows. Englanders, chiffonniers, painters and sculptors, workmen, plom-plom, old eggs of women, and they will say, "Ah, what a beautiful woman was that!" Ugh, it makes one shudder to read it in the book. And here I stood all alone, silently gazing upon the sad remains of just such a creature, fished out of the Seine the night before, perhaps. On the occasion of my visit to that same morgue, I found 3 bodies reclining on those brass slabs, all of a row. One was that of a woman of middle age. There could still be traced in the even, comely features superabundance of lustrous brown hair, which lay in rich profusion around the bare shoulders, long eyelashes, heavy eyebrows even, white teeth, which were apparent through the slightly parted lips, some of that beauty which in former days perchance made her the belle of some social circle. The 2 others were men, one far advanced in life, the other past its meridian, both gray, one bald. The features of one were placid, calm, as if in sleep, while those of the other were distorted, the whole countenance reminding one of Sir Walter Scott's lines, "Nor can old age a wrinkle trace more deeply than despair." There was a large bruise on the forehead, indicating that he had met death perchance through violence. Those were the bodies of unknown dead, exposed there to the public gaze for identification. It cannot now be truthfully said in the language of Svengali that the water, all day long and all night, shall trickle, 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 etc., for on the contrary there is now no leather apron put on the middle of the corpse, nor any little brass tap over the head. But the bodies, though somewhat exposed about the neck and shoulders, are quite covered as to the remainder of the form, and their damp clothing is cleansed and laid on top of them. The glass case within which the bodies recline on the slanting slabs is now kept cold by a refrigerating process, such as is used in commercial affairs. On the front wall of the morgue hung photographs of those who had been buried before identification, so that a final means remains of identification long after hope has been resigned of tracing them. As I turned to leave this sad place, the bells in the ancient belfry of Notre Dame chimed out the morning hour in sad, sweet cadences, while in a small green park hard by, just within the shadow of the church, numerous boozy men and women courted that rest which the past night had denied them. Oh, it was pitiful, in that great city full. Home they had none. The fact that those 3 public institutions were, so to speak, in one group is quite significant. The cathedral, a shelter for the soul, the Hôtel Dieu to heal the body, and the morgue for the last remains. The book stalls on the banks of the Seine were objects of much interest to many with literary inclinations. The palace of the Luxembourg, where annually the masterpieces of the students of the Latin Quarter and others are placed on exhibition, the great durable bridges which span the river, the Eiffel Tower kissing the clouds almost, the Trocadero, remnant of a great World's Fair, the Invalides, sacred to the memory of France's great dead, the Louvre, Mecca of those who love art, where can be seen canvases and statuary that cannot be duplicated, the Place de la Concorde, with its Egyptian obelisk statuary and memories of the guillotine of the Revolution, the Arc de Triomphe, sacred to the memory of the great Napoleon, the Bois de Boulogne, the Place de la Bastille, and last but not least for the ladies, the Bon Marche, where they buy the beautiful and the useful at a reasonable price. The great opera house would alone make any city possessing it noteworthy, and deserves too extensive a notice to attempt it here, so I will refer the reader to some books of travels for information in this behalf. From Paris we pass over once more into the great city of London, and while sojourning there during the following 3 months, I embraced the opportunity to study that great town more thoroughly before returning again to my native land. However, a description of a hurried trip which I took previous to this time to Ireland. The beautiful Emerald Isle may be of interest to my readers. Old Ireland, the mother of an unfortunate race of men and women whose deeds are involved in story and song, the cradle in which have rocked poets, statesmen, soldiers, and martyrs. Of poets one may mention Moore, who wrote Lalla Rookh; of statesmen and orators, Henry Grattan, Daniel O'Connell, Sheridan, Burke, Curran, and Parnell; of soldiers, the Iron Duke, Wellington, MacMahon, Joe Shields, Thomas Francis Meagher, Mulligan and Corcoran of the bloody 69th, which went into the battle of Bull Run, stripped to the waist, and fought like brave men long and well for our glorious Union, and last but not least of gallant Phil Sheridan, who saved the day at Winchester, 20 miles away. As for scientists, we can mention Sir Humphrey Davy, who invented the little safety lamp which miners wear to protect them from explosions when they are at work down in the coal mines underneath the ground, thereby saving the lives of many miners every year. And as for martyrs to the cause of Irish liberty, the list may be headed by the name of that immortal Robert Emmet, who died in his youth and fair promise for the freedom of his native land. I left the great ship Campania at Queenstown, steamed up the beautiful bay to Cork, a large and populous city, the principal business street of which, Patrick Street, containing a monument and statue of Father Matthew in the centre of it, reminded me that at last I was treading the old sod. On our way up the bay we saw a fleet of 5 German men of war, no submarines at that time. They had been anchored off the port of Cork for several days, replenishing their larders and exchanging friendly greetings with the English soldiers stationed at the various barracks in and near that city. From there they went to Cowes on the Isle of Wight, to be present and aid in honouring the festivities incident to the visit of the German Emperor to his grandma, Queen Victoria. In view of conditions which have prevailed between England and Germany since the year of which I write, it seems strange to note the bonds of consanguinity which exist between the ex-emperor and the royal family of Great Britain. After visiting various places of interest in Cork, including the cathedral in which Father Matthew preached at the church, the belfry of which contains the sweet bells of Shannon, which sound so bewitching on the River Lee, I hired an Irish jaunting car and started post-haste for the village of Blarney and Blarney Castle, my object being, of course, to kiss the Blarney Stone. There is a stone that whoe'er kisses, sure he ne'er misses to become eloquent. The route to Blarney, covering some 7 miles, carried me through some of the most lovely landscape scenery which I had ever seen. I was prepared for it, for it was one day in May, and my expectation had been quickened years and years before that time. Going out by an ancient road known as Sunday's Well Road, named for an ancient well which was noted for the healing qualities of its waters, we passed several chateaux or country residences, which might well be compared to Eden. Over our heads, at times, the interlacing boughs and foliage formed a veritable arbour, and when we emerged from it, near the end of our route, we experienced the sensation of coming from a leafy, flowery tunnel, and the River Lee, winding its tortuous way through the beautiful green valley at the foot of the hill, gave to the whole scene a freshness and delight which, once experienced, can never be forgotten. But here we are at Blarney, a little village, a very old town, nestled amongst the hills, and hard by is the renowned old and grey Blarney Castle, telling of party strife and conflicts numerous and severe in the long ago, an anachronism on the face of the fruitful earth. As I was entering the grounds upon which the castle stands, I met Sir George Colthurst, the present then owner of the castle, a youthful, good-looking man, and I wondered whether he had won his spurs or had the title by inheritance or favour, for we all know that in Ireland conditions are not always what they seem. However, we enter the ancient castle and begin climbing up a space of at least 100 feet to the parapet, suspended under which and held in position by 2 strong iron braces is the famous stone. Just here, in passing, it may not be amiss to mention 3 other famous little old stones which I had encountered in my peregrinations in Great Britain. There is in Westminster Abbey a very old stone known as the stone brought from Scone in Scotland, on which the Scottish kings from the time immemorial had been crowned. Then in the British Museum is to be seen a little old stone known as the Rosetta Stone, which was discovered near Cairo in Egypt during Napoleon's expedition in the land, and is called Rosetta Stone for the town of Rosetta, near which it was found. It is polished on one side and contains an inscription in 3 different languages, Egyptian hieroglyphics, Greek, and Latin. It furnished the key for deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphics, and in that way has been of priceless value in the difficult work of unravelling Egyptian history. I found another on the top of Ross Castle on the banks of the lakes of Killarney, which for the want of a better name I will term the Kissing Stone. It is said that whoever kisses this stone can thereafter kiss any girl he wishes to kiss. As I did not kiss that stone, I have no means of verifying the old tradition. Going back to the Blarney Stone, it is no small task to kiss the Blarney Stone, for in order to perform the osculatory feat, one must be held head downward over the parapet with a yawning chasm of not less than 100 feet beneath him, at the imminent risk of his life. This rider, however, who was suspended by his ankles by two accommodating tourists, performed the feat out of consideration for a group of true and tried Irish friends in far-away America, and if in the future he should indulge in more or less Blarney, the reason therefore can be easily explained. Here is the traditionary origin of the Blarney Stone as given to me on the spot by an Irishman. Once upon a time, the McCarthy, who founded the castle on returning from the chase with a friend, heard cries of distress from the direction of the River Lee near by. On investigation, they found two sisters in the extremity of drowning, and thereupon they right manfully rescued them. In return for this act, one of the sisters told the McCarthy to go and look under the parapet on the front side of his castle, and he would discover a stone about 3 feet in length and 2 in width, which, if he had the courage to lean over and kiss, would make him thenceforward invincible against all enemies in battle. The McCarthy did as he was directed, and from that time forward no one of his neighbouring foes could prevail against him, hence the Blarney Stone. From Blarney I went next to Killarney, a pretty village sustained largely by the generosity of tourists, who flocked there during the summer season to enjoy the wonderfully beautiful scenery of the lakes of Killarney. Oh, did you e'er hear of Kate Kearney? She lived on the banks of Killarney. Believe it from me, no heart could be free if it heard the sweet sound of her Blarney. I have paraphrased the foregoing lines somewhat, as I do not remember exact words of the winsome song. I was informed by my guide, who, by the way, had resided for years in our state of New Hampshire, that Kate Kearney had such beautiful long hair that once, when following the big game, she pursued a road to the top of the Tyrol mountain. Her hair flowed down to its base. But these refreshing lakes and their surrounding scenery, oh, beauty of nature! As God made her, she verily has no rival. While the lakes are pure and limpid, with an atmosphere full of vitality, yet the scenery on their banks surpasses all. Here you find mingled in rich luxuriance the oak, the elm, and the beech tree fully matured. Then we see in all their perfected beauty the holly, the arbutus, the yew, the rhododendron, the bay, the mountain ash, silver fir, and great beds of roses of Sharon, and ferns such as this writer had never seen before. There, too, is ancient Ross Castle, with some of the identical old bronze guns still mounted, which fired upon the Ludlow and his followers, whom Oliver Cromwell had sent to reduce the castle in 1640. On the top of the ancient stronghold, which was founded in the 14th century, is the Kissing Stone referred to in the foregoing. I found over in Ireland that foine old Irish gentleman of whom I had read so much. He is a verity, bubbling over with wit and humour, and abounding in that sweet Irish brogue of which the late General Scott spoke from the balcony of our American house, way back in the 50s, when he was a presidential candidate and was courting the Irish vote. My guide, already referred to, was full of wit and humour. Pointing to a high mountain near the lakes with an indentation on the top of it, he said, "Do you see that gap in the ridge of the mountain?" I nodded affirmatively. "Well, then," he said, "that little gap is called the Divil's Bite. When the O'Donoghue held Ross Castle over there, which was the last in Ireland to surrender to the forces of Cromwell, the Divil one day did give him some of his impertinence, and Donoghue gave him such a whack on his devilish back with his blackthorn stick, that the divil run roaring to yon mountain, and bit a piece out of the hump of it, and split it out in the lake, just where ye see that little island. And lowering his voice, it's the only spleck of land that the divil owns around these lakes. Glory be to God." Pointing to another high mountain not far removed, he said, "There's a lake up on the top of that mountain, and it's the deepest in the world. One day there was a Yankee hero, and he said they had deeper lakes in America than that one. He said they had 'em 3 miles deep in the Rocky Mountains. I told him sure that was nothing, for one day an American gentleman tried to swim across it, but when he got in the middle of the lake the cramps took him, and he begun to sink, and he didn't stop until he reached Australia, when his feet hit the head of a young lady who was passing by, and hurted her. She sued him for damages, but he was a poor man in the country, having left even his clothes behind him. So they settled by marrying each other, for good-looking men was amazingly scarce in Australia then. On my route from Killarney to Dublin we passed through sections where a great many shanties in a tumble-down, forsaken condition could be seen. I inquired the cause of this forlorn condition, and was informed that the former tenants of them had left Ireland, had emigrated to the United States, owing to the severities of the landlord system in Ireland. Some, they said, had also gone to Australia and Canada, but by far the larger number to the Great Republic. In one station in Tipperary I bought of an elderly Irish woman a blackthorn cane, a shillelagh. As I received it from her, she remarked with a twinkle in her eye, "We calls 'em Tipperary rifles over here." When the train stopped at another station, a scene occurred which filled my eyes with some of those tears for the shedding of which more or less of merriment was called forth at home. Two pretty Irish girls, bound for the United States, were in the act of taking leave of the old sod. The older and stronger one was using all her influence and authority to prevent a scene, but was unequal to the task, for as the train slowly pulled away from the platform, the younger one began to scream and hysterically sob out, "Oh, mother, mother, let me go to my poor old mother." "Arrah, hush now," exclaimed the other. "None of that. Didn't I tell ye that I'd hev none of that?" And she caught her by the arm and pulled her by main force from the window. "Mother, oh mother," persisted the younger one, let me go to my dear mother. Let me wave a handkerchief at her once more." She sobbed, and tearing herself from her sister's grasp, she thrust her head through the window, and frantically waved it a last adieu, which one could plainly see carried her whole heart with it to the dearest and best friend that she had on earth. Then resuming her seat, she wept as though her heart was breaking, until the train was far removed from the sad scene. Since that sad parting in Ireland, I have never met a group of Irish emigrants on land or sea without recurring to it, and say what we may of the Irish in Ireland, I shall ever believe that the ties of kinship are veritably true and binding. Ere long, with the companion of the trip, we were walking the streets of Dublin, and viewing the beauties of Phoenix Park and other lovely spots. It was then that the foundation was laid in my mind, which has enabled me to follow with increased interest the frightful scenes which have since transpired there, incidental to the Sinn Fein and other uprisings. Long live the beautiful Green Isle, and may God hasten the day when peace and prosperity and good will shall prevail throughout her domains. End of chapter 17.